Pleasure having you with us. I'm Dike Rostant. Welcome back to the TTT News. The time we live in leads us once more to ask about the characteristics of good leadership. Gestalt trained certified professional facilitator, executive coach, organizational development consultant, and founder of the Gestalt Leadership Conference, Maxine Attong. She joins us now to go in depth on the 5th iteration of the conference and other issues of leading with love. Welcome, Maxine. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing?
Hi, Dike. I'm fine. Learning to lead with love. But other than that, I'm fine. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you, but very curious though, because we have different definitions of leadership. People who bring people forward, people who push people from behind, like slave drivers, but leading with love. What kind of define that for me, please?
So we've all been through COVID. That's been our collective experience. And one of the things that I've observed during COVID is that we each took leadership in a different way. Whether it was in our community, some people, started food drives. We helped people who didn't have employment. We saw about kids whose parents had to go out to work. And I think in that way, there was something that we always don't see in organizations. We saw people taking initiative, and we saw people showing compassion, showing empathy, showing care for each other. So really, those are all elements of love. And I think a lot of times when we talk about leadership, we want to label it and say, it's servant leadership, you're being autocratic and all these labels. And for me, leadership is really about creating common good. Regardless of what you do, it must be for common good. And so therefore, during the pandemic, I saw a lot of people in my neighborhood, my friends, my family members, creating common good by acts of compassion and acts of kindness. And that's basically what we are celebrating in this conference and what we're asking people to bring back into their organizations. Now that people want to go back out to work and return to normal, how about working with those lessons of the pandemic, those lessons of care, empathy, compassion, kindness, and bringing that into the places where we spend a lot of our time, i.e. our workplaces.
And I want to follow up on that on that train of thought in terms of like people returning physically en masse to work, but and citing persons who say it takes about 21 days to entrench a new behavioral trait or something that you're exchanging. What are some of those things that you'd want people to be mindful of, especially who are functioning in a leadership position with people who have spent so much time away? I know you're coming back to these things that may seem vaguely familiar to get the job done.
Yeah, I would say definitely lead with love. The elements of love, compassion, kindness, patience, because it's going to be a strange environment. We grieved a lot during COVID because we lost so much. We lost the ability to go to work, to be with our contemporaries, to even take the after work lime or go and play football after work. We lost all of that. So now we are relearning new habits, just as you said, and it will take time. So for leaders, I think patience is needed, as well as we are still in uncertain times. We just saw that in China, there was a major lockdown again. So people are wondering, I am wondering, are we going back into that situation? I am dreading it personally. And I think in our organizations, these are the sort of conversations we need to have, because we are making the assumption, one, that everybody wants to return to work. I know a number of people who don't want to return to work, not physically. And two, we're making the assumption that we're going to continue life as normal. And there's COVID-19 still saying, hey, I'm not done yet. We have new waves. We don't know what will happen. And I always say, if it's one pandemic, maybe we should just continue bracing for another one. So very much in organizations, leaders, just as we didn't know anything during the pandemic, let's not pretend that we knew everything, because it's not humanly possible. Two, let's have compassion, kindness, and patience as we resume work face to face.
How do we continue to have that organizational thrust towards creating common good and having empathy, compassion, while trying to take the best of the things that we would have been doing, having to pivot, working remotely, and saying, okay, well, these things can work even though we're returning. So the persons who are very functional, working remotely, working virtually, the people who are dreading having to jump up in the traffic and reach, and how do we take some of those lessons and put them in and create this kind of hybrid sort of thing? What is the leadership mindset that we need to approach that with?
So during the pandemic, there were so many beautiful lessons that we got. I need to reiterate again that leaders didn't know what to do. So everybody had to pitch in and figure it out together. And so a lot of organizations, when they started meetings, there were leaders who were saying things like, I call each member of my staff. And when I call them, I'm not talking about work, I'm just checking in with them. There were also leaders who I spoke to who also said, before we start a meeting, we do check-ins. I stop and I say, how are you doing? How are your kids doing? And everybody joins in. So what would it be like if we were to keep those elements? Because those were ways in which people who I know or clients of mine have actually demonstrated leadership during and creating common good during the pandemic. So when we're back in work mode and the document seems urgent and we have to finish something by this deadline and the project looks like it's going to go crazy, how about we stay calm and we check in on each other? And that simple act of compassion is about creating common good. So, very often people ask me when I'm doing leadership and I'm defining leadership, are business people leaders? And I say, sure, some of them are. And the question for all of them, are you creating common good? So if you're a business person and you're the only person getting wealthy while everybody else is suffering, are you a leader or are you just a good businessman? So that's the common good for me is what I use as my defining movement for leaders. So you're leading a team in an organization, you're the only one being promoted, and your team members are not being promoted. Maybe you're not creating common good.
And have you heard examples or see the potential for that friction in terms of someone being very empathetic and asking, how are you doing, and prepared to listen to the answer, which could be something very distinct. And then when people return to work, it's almost as though there's a return to that kind of autocratic style. All right, now, yes. Once again, I am the law unto everything else. I give you this instruction and you carry it out, and feelings be damned.
So, I have an example, and this is my example of a leader who loved or was able to demonstrate acts of love. I mean, every morning I would go to my office and, just sit at my desk. And I guess most mornings I was okay. And a particular morning, for whatever reason, I was not okay. And my director, he was actually part owner of the company. He came to my desk with a cup of tea, exactly the way that I drank it. It wasn't exactly the way I drank it, but he came with a cup of tea and he put it on my desk and he said, I noticed when you walked in this morning that you weren't feeling well. That blew me away, and that man could ask me to do anything to today and I'll do it for him. Because that is, and I'm just giving that as an example, how easy it is for us to actually show acts of kindness, for us to actually show love at the workplace. This is a man who had an office, a big office in the organization, and his secretary made him tea all the time. And he made me a cup of tea. So I'm just pulling that out. So maybe, and that for me is an act of compassion and an act of empathy, because I didn't even have to tell him. He saw that I was not being my usual self. And so he put himself out there and brought me something that his secretary usually does for him. I mean, that is just a lesson I walk forward with today.
And little things lead to big things. But this is something that we'll actually continue speaking about when we return. Leading with Love. We're speaking with leadership consultant and specialist Maxine Attong. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are going in depth on Leading with Love. We're doing so with leadership specialist Maxine Attong, and we're speaking about it generally as well as the 5th iteration of the Gestalt Conference. And just before we speak specifically to the conference, Maxine, I want to ask about trust issues, micromanaging, inconsistencies in leadership style, and how those things can affect the overall running of an organization.
I think, I'll say this, the opposite of love is fear. And very often when leaders display those qualities, it's because they are afraid. And afraid not in the sense that there's, a big bad word, but afraid of their own ability to succeed. So therefore, I micromanage everybody because I need to control this for me to look good. It also is because there is a belief about a lack of abundance. Because if I allow people to show how good they are, if I don't stab people in the back, then there won't be enough for me. So those are, those are really habits that display the dysfunction that is in our society on a whole. Thought processes like the pie isn't big enough. There must be a top dog or a top man, meaning there's only, it's a pyramid, there's only room at the top for a very few. So a concept of scarcity, a concept of competition, a sense that if you do well, then maybe I won't just look as good as I should look. And there's there's something that I always tell clients, stay in your lane, because once you stay in your lane, you'll be fine. So there's no real competition there. If it is that you don't succeed in that organization, there are tons of organizations that will take your talents. If it is that you're on a team and you're being treated badly, you can follow the protocols in the organization, but eventually you'll have to make a decision whether you want to stay or you leave. There is enough for everybody. If you're good at your craft, you are going to do well at your craft. I think the problem is not so much as the leaders treating people badly. I think the problem is the employees not having a voice and not knowing how to speak up. So most all organizations have rules, all organizations have policies and procedures. Employees need to know their rights and how to address those issues when they pop up. And I think for all of us, we need to be able to draw a line and say, am I really happy here? If I'm not, then out of an act of self-love, maybe this is not a place for me. Keep your job while you look for a next job.
And I really like that point about staying in your lane. And many people would have discovered new lanes, discovered new abilities, some just looking for something to do while at home, some out of necessity having to find a way to accrue income. What do you tell that person who may want to bring some of that talent that they found within themselves to the job, but they're not finding the way to do that? Or is it just a little more of, while they're there, look for something else?
So, I think the way we look at jobs needs to change. This future of work, etc. A job is a contract first and foremost between one party and another for a certain amount of time for a particular type of work. And we get involved in the complications. But we as individuals, we need to take responsibility for ourselves. A job will not give you all that you need to do. So I am an accountant, and I have been an accountant for many years. So while I was honing my craft around facilitation, I would look for opportunities to work with NGOs to do their strategic plans over the weekends. Even when I was doing coaching, I was still employed in organizations. Organizations didn't want me to be, the organizations I was employed with did not employ me as a coach. So on weekends after work, I pursued my passion. And so there is the sense, I know we want the organizations to take care of us. That's not what they hired us for. If we are changing lanes, that's fine. In terms of careers, that's fine. And the organization, even though they can benefit from all the skills that we have, they didn't hire us for that new skill set. When I was an accountant, my organization wanted an accountant. They didn't want a facilitator. They didn't want a coach. They didn't want a leadership specialist. Even though I had all of those skills, they hired me as an accountant. It's a bitter pill to swallow, and we need to take responsibility for those things. It's a job is not there to give us everything that we need.
I'm grateful you're bringing that kind of objectivity. I can see people on both sides saying, okay, well, I was sure. I thought she was on my side. But at the same time, the truth is the truth. But we haven't necessarily spoken specifically about this fifth iteration. What were some of those challenges or learning opportunities, some of the interesting things, saying, okay, well, this is something I'm going to do. I'm going to get it off the ground because it's happening at the end of April.
End of April. So we started, well, I should say, there's no we, it's I. I started this conference in 2017. It was a dream of mine because I think leadership is so much needed in our world. And I think because we often think as leaders, as people outside of ourselves, my whole intention is really to ignite the leadership spark that resides within all of us. Your mother, your father, you might just be a friend. There are lots of times we take charge and we do things that are displaying leadership qualities. And we don't call ourselves leaders because we think of leaders as, people at the top of organizations, politicians, sports people. We call all kind of people leaders except ourselves. So that's why I started this conference, to invite people just like me and just like everybody else who I know to come and have discussions about leadership. And so we sort of every year take a pulse on what is happening in the world. So of course, in 2020, we did not have a conference because we used to have physical conferences, 17, 18, 19. And 19, we went to Barbados. It was really, really cool. And then in 20, of course, COVID-19. So we had to squash our plans. And 2021, we tentatively entered the online space to feel what that is like, having an online conference. And you know what? It's pretty cool because last year we had people from the US, UK, India, across the Caribbean coming to the conference because it was online. And this year we're seeing the same thing. So in terms of the teams that we use, so that's the post there, Leading with Love. In 2021, we explored equity because that is what happened during COVID-19. You know, all our fake beliefs that this is a fair system and it's meritocracy, COVID-19 laid bare all of that. So in 2021, we talked about leading with equity. And now that we've come in on the end of COVID-19, our collective experience was that what brought us through the pandemic was each other. We had to check in with each other. We had to play games online. But most of all, I think, at least for me and a lot of people who I know, they realized that they really needed people. And so this year, we want to celebrate that, leading with love and inviting people to take that into their organizations, whether you have a role as a leader or you don't have a role as a leader, but chances are somewhere in your community, in your church, within your family group, within your netball team or your football team, when you're taking a sweat, you could probably take leadership in those avenues. So we're going to be discussing leading with love. Go ahead, Dike.
And we have about a minute and a half. Who are some of those people that are part of this experience this time around?
So John O'Hanafin is our keynote, and he's like amazing. He has worked mostly big companies in the world, and he taught executive presence at Wharton Business School. We have Barbara Perkins, who's going to do a small thing about how could you lead with your cup that is empty, challenging leaders to take care of themselves. And she worked with Ayanna Vasant. She was her director, as well as, actually, she was just awarded a medal by the US president for volunteering in March 2022. We have Janice Sutherland. Janice Sutherland hails from the Caribbean. She is in Antigua. She's British. And we have Suren Maharaj, who's a good friend of mine, and he'll be our moderator for that day. So if you want to check out the conference, just go to www.maxineattong.com. That's my website, and you can register there. The conference is $120 a person, groups of 5, $100. It's on April 28th, 2022. And that's our logo there, Leading with Love, yeah?
And once again, www.maxineattong.com. And the thing is that you have other pearls of wisdom, things that people can think about as they navigate everyday life. And leadership starts with self, even before you go outwards. So that is also something to think about. But we want to thank you very much for spending the time and sharing some of those factors that we should be looking at in terms of leading with love, Maxine. And on behalf of the entire TTT News team, this has been In Depth with me, Dike Rostant. Thank you for joining us.